from the Department of Parks and Recreation. We have a few housekeeping items to discuss, and then I will turn the program over to Kathy. Today's program is being recorded and will be placed on the UDP&R YouTube channel with many other past programs and events. All participants, with the exception of the speaker and the UDT staff, will be muted with video, camera, web camera turned off. There will be one Q&A session at the end of the presentation. We ask only during Q&A sections will participants be unmuted and or have their camera turned on. Please feel free to post chat questions throughout the presentation. Chat comments will be read and addressed during the Q&A section. Participants who wish to speak during the Q&A section should press the raise your hand button on the participant screen, which can be found by pressing the reactions button on your screen. One by one, the staff will call on each participant with their virtual hand raised. That participant will be unmuted and have their camera requested to be turned on if they choose. If there is no response, the next person in line will be called on. UDT staff at any time reserves the right to mute a participant, end the video stream of a participant, or end the meeting at his discretion due to hackers, inappropriate language, or any other activity the staff deems inappropriate. We ask for everyone's patience and understanding as we navigate through these unprecedented times and work through our virtual public offerings. We welcome comments and suggestions for our virtual meeting protocols for future meetings. I would now like to turn the program over to Kathy Salisbury from Temple University.
Thank you, Linda. Appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. So I am Kathy Salisbury. I'm the director of the Ambler Arboretum of Temple University. And I just want to test to see how you all are doing. If you're familiar with the reactions button in Zoom, if you could just give me a thumbs up or some sort of indication that you have been to the Ambler Arboretum before, that would be great. It's just saying it's located in Upper Dublin. So it's some people, maybe your backyard. I saw a few thumbs up, so that's great. And so today we're going to talk about plant adaptations. And so these are the things that plants do for particular purposes, for particular reasons as part of how they've evolved. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but I wanted to start because I'm the director of the Arboretum. And so it is also my job to raise awareness about the Arboretum and share with people all the different things we have to offer. I'm just going to show a quick video that lets you know a little bit more about the Ambler Arboretum before we get started. So we'll start with that, and then we'll get on to the plant adaptations. Sorry. so that is just a little bit about the Ambler Arboretum. We have a YouTube page. The Temple Ambler campus has a YouTube page, and you can find that video there, as well as lots and lots and lots of other videos about the Arboretum, about the campus, gardening stuff, all kinds of things. So I encourage you to visit if you use YouTube. Also, we are part of America's Garden Capital, which is an organization, it's a member organization that helps promote public gardens around the region. So there's 36 public gardens within 30 miles of Philadelphia. We're one of them, but there's lots and lots of them, and each one has its own history, its own collections, its own story. And I don't know how many of you have seen this, but this is America's Garden Capital Passport. And basically it gives you information about the public gardens in the area, gives you a map and information about the types of collections, their hours, all of that stuff. And then in the back, you have spaces where you can get your passport stamped or write in a secret password. So these are available at public gardens in the area. So if you don't know about all 36 public gardens, I encourage you to find one of these and then venture into these garden spaces. So it's also a great website. If you just go to America's Garden Capital, if you just Google that, americasgardencapital.org, all the gardens are on there, and it's an interactive website. You can go to their site. You can search by certain features. And also right now during time of COVID, you can find out what the modifications are for visiting, if gardens are open, that kind of thing. So, so I highly recommend you visiting that website as well. So with that, I would like to say too, that if you have questions as I'm going through this, I keep looking at the wrong screen. If you have questions while I'm going through this, just feel free to put them in the chat. I'll try and keep an eye on the chat, and I'll try and answer them as I go. But if I don't get to them, Linda's helping me out to keep an eye on them. So feel free to use the chat for questions if you have them. So I got to thinking about this, about plant adaptations and how plants respond to stress or deal with environmental factors and the world around them. Just as I listen to conversations and how people interact with each other, I kind of think about how plants interact with each other, because I'm a horticulturist, a plant nerd. I try to relate my life to plant life. so that's where the inspiration for this talk came from. And so, I noticed that we do have lots of types of media that surround us. What's happening around us filters into the other every day, but there's not really a lot of discussion about people-plant interactions, or it's people-people interactions mostly. And so rarely do we hear about, in the news about these people-plant interactions, but these stories happen every day. If we looked closely or got into the right feeds, I guess we could find information and news about research that's happening about all these new things we're learning about plants, about ways plants are able to help us, about how we're helping plants, how we're more like plants than we might think we are. So, each second plants are interacting with the world around them, whether it is with animals, humans, which we are animals, right? Fungus or other plants. They're constantly on the defense. They're constantly communicating. And so I just, as we, in some cases, are becoming more defensive about things and figuring out ways to communicate, new ways to communicate, I thought that plants could be a model for different ways to interact in the world. And this might seem pretty far-fetched, but stick with me here and we'll see. We'll see how it goes. So, because, unlike people, plants just can't get up and remove themselves from the conversation or from the situation. And oftentimes you wonder, since people can do that, why don't they do that? But that's a whole different talk, I think. But just like people, plants have developed a lot of ways to protect themselves from harm and different ways to communicate. So, and then different parts of nature, so animals, fungus, insects, have found ways to exploit those defenses for their own survival. So it just got me curious about this. So that's where we're talking about today, these plant adaptations. So the first adaptation I wanted to talk about is being soft and gentle. So I compare these to how we communicate or defend or interact with people, right? There's different tacks that we can take, TACTS, that we can take to interact or defend or guard. And, one of those can be soft and gentle. And there are plants that do that too. So here we see the soft leaves of common mullein, which is a roadside weed often found in fallow fields, minimally managed areas. We tend to propagate it and leave it here in the Arboretum just because of its great texture, silver gray foliage. It's so soft. And we use it in the flower show exhibit when we're participating in the Philadelphia Flower Show. So we do tend to leave it. Gets these tall yellow spikes of yellow flowers, which the pollinators love. And so we keep it around. So this has the subtle, soft way of deflecting harm. And you might know a person who acts like this. They're always gentle and calm. And I personally admire those folks who are able to maintain that. So but the plants that have these soft hairs don't have them just for decorative reasons. Rarely in nature, we have to remember that rarely in nature, naturally, is anything on a plant purely decorative. It's all serving a purpose. A plant is not going to put all that energy and resources into just making something pretty. And that is the case for nature in general, right? Now, when we take plants and we hybridize them and we cross them and we mess with their genetics, we're doing that maybe just for ornamental reasons. But in nature, the plants aren't going to waste the resources to do that. So there's a purpose to everything that we see on a plant. And so plants like this common mullein and lamb's ear, you might be familiar with lamb's ear, which is another really soft plant, gray, gets yellow flowers, have hairs that are so soft you can't help but pet them. Maybe that's just me, but I just feel like when you walk by, you have to pet them. Or it's just, super, super soft, right? So imagine the softest blanket that you know, and this plant is that soft. But they protect the plants. They actually make eating the leaves unenjoyable for the animals. So even peach fuzz. So if you have a peach and it's fuzzy, that is a defense that's keeping insects and in some cases herbivores from eating those leaves. Rarely will you find these leaves insect ridden or holes with insect evidence. It is a protection. So though it's soft and we find it enjoyable, the animals that might eat those leaves don't find it a pleasant experience at all. And so these animals might just eat this as a last resort if there was nothing else around. In addition, these hairs on the plant help keep the plant's moisture in. So these soft hairs cover the plant's pores. Pores on the leaves of a plant are called stomates. And those stomates are like our pores in our skin, and they're used to exchange gases and water as the plant grows and goes through its life cycles through the seasons. And so in some cases, this plant does not want to lose that much water. 90% of the water a plant uses is lost through its leaves. And so these plants tend to grow in more arid regions naturally. They'll grow around here too, where it can be hot and humid, but naturally in their native habitat, it's an arid region. And so they have developed these hairs to help stop the water from being taken out of the leaves in that arid climate. And so, there's multiple reasons, and we'll find that's the case, is that they've adapted this one feature that serves multiple purposes in the plant. So the other thing that's really interesting to me about this is that these hairs may also become the interior of a hummingbird nest. So you can watch a hummingbird go and pull these little hairs off of these leaves, and then they will tuck that into the inside of their nest to create a nice soft spot for the eggs and the babies. So multiple purposes, and then an animal in nature has found a way to use it to support itself. So we see that a lot in nature. So armor, right, is another way of protecting and defending ourselves. So we kind of if we think of the armor that knights used to wear or whatever, but this hard outer shell, that some people put up, and or they might have plants have that too. So some plants have adapted that. So we have the soft hairs, and then we have the armor. So these plants have their guard up all the time. We might think of armor or bark as armor for a tree. So there's no doubt that these trees are trying to protect themselves at all moments from all danger, right? They're just always on guard. They're always protected. Some people are like that too. You may know some people like that. So bark is the protective layer of the tree or shrub. So there's a layer of bark on a tree, and then there's 3 very thin layers. That is the life of the tree. They're so thin, but that is where the cambium is, which are the cells that the tree grows to make the tree bigger. And then there's the xylem and the phloem, and those are the cells that move the water and nutrients up and down the tree. That's the vascular system. And it's just this very thin layer right under the bark. And then the rest of the tree is heartwood. It's dead wood that is supporting the tree as it grows. It's just there for strength. It's like the skeleton or the structure of the tree. And so that bark is really important, because without that bark, all of the growing is right there on the edge, and is very susceptible to damage. So it's sort of like our skin protecting our veins that are just below the surface, right? Bark's doing the same thing, only in a more stiff, armored way. And there are thin barked trees, and there are thick bark trees, right? There's bark comes in lots of different shapes and forms and textures. So the harm that could come, you could probably think of harm that could come to a tree and why this bark is important. So it could be friction from other trees rubbing against it in a forested situation. It could be gnawing teeth of rodents, or buck rub from the deer antlers, or the wicked whir of a weed whacker, right? The bark is protecting, although after enough assaults, the bark fails in a lot of cases, but our lawn equipment, bark is protecting from that also, from insects, any sort of damage. And but bark is great for us. We can use it to help identify the plants. It also adds ornamental interest into the landscape. We can use it as an ornamental feature in our landscape because it's always there. Because it's always there, it's also good, useful for ID. And, it's there even in the winter after all the leaves have fallen. The thin protective layer of bark not only protects the fragile inner workings of the tree, but it also may protect something else, right? So it is this armor. But, beneath the peels and flakes of shagbark hickory, you might find overwintering moths. In the warmer months, you might find bats hanging out. So it's not only protecting the tree, but here again, this adaptation for this plant, other animals have started to take advantage of it to protect themselves. Interestingly enough, some bark exfoliates. So shagbark hickory gets these big flaking sections, and other trees have bark that just peels off, and you might wonder, what is that adaptation? Why does that do that? And in a lot of cases, those trees have evolved in areas where the conditions are suitable for growing moss or lichens on the trunk of the tree itself. And the moss and lichens don't hurt the tree. They're just using it for support. But eventually that bark would get covered, and that could become problematic because it's holding moisture against the bark. You don't want to do that. Soft bark is not as protective as hard bark, right? And so these trees have evolved to flake off their bark so that they're losing that moss and lichens and algae and that kind of thing. So that's why you might find this exfoliating bark. So protection for the tree, but also protection for the wildlife around it, and that adaptation. We also have sharp and pointy, right? So nothing says stay away from me better than spines, prickles, and thorns coming out from all angles of a plant. There are various trees, shrubs, vines, and herbaceous plants. So herbaceous just means no woody parts, no bark, and no wood formed in it. And so herbaceous plants, woody plants, vines, trees, shrubs, there are forms of all of those that have spiky protections. So probably what immediately comes to mind if you say thorns or spikes or spines or cactus. And And that is true, they have those. But what looks like thorns or spikes or spines on a plant are different. And though their purpose is the same. So I'm going to tell you about a few different types of spiky protection, prickly protection that plants have. And it's divided up into 3 categories. So we have spines, thorns, or prickles. So spines, like those found on a cactus, are actually modified leaves. And so these leaves are modified to reduce surface area, because think of where most cactus live, that they are in the desert, right? So they need to protect and preserve all the water they can. So, so in order to reduce the amount of water that disappears from the plant, these leaves have been modified to these tiny little spikes. So plants lose 99% of their water through their leaves. It's that losing of the water through the stomates, those pores on the leaves. It's that movement of the water through that creates the vacuum system that it gets the roots to suck up water from the ground. So that's what creates this vacuum and this circulation to keep water and nutrients moving in the plant. And the losing of water is fine if there's a lot of water available for a plant, but when there's not a lot of water available for a plant, you don't want to lose it through the leaves. So these leaves, again, have become smaller, they've been reduced, they become thinner over time, and now their surface area is so small, they don't lose water. So that's one way that these spines are protecting that plant, right? It might not be the what's intuitive to us, right? We wouldn't look at cactus spine and go, oh, that's to help it stop losing water. Normally we think, or many of us think, that's to protect the plant from being eaten, right? It's sharp, it's spiny, nothing's going to go and bite down onto that. So so these thinner, harder leaves protect the fleshy parts of the plants from desert dwellers, right? So now it has two ways that these spines are protecting these plants. And so these are spines. They're modified leaves that are spines. So that's botanically what they are. So a cactus has spines. Thorns, on the other hand, they're modified shoots of a plant. So spines are modified leaves. Thorns are modified shoots. And they arise from a bud or a growing point on the plant, a node. So here you see thorns on this. This is Poncirus trifoliata. This is a hardy orange. These will eventually turn orange. But look at these spines here. These thorns here. So you see, those are thorns. They still offer protection to the plant and to animals that might call that plant dinner. We've also planted them in places where to stop people from walking through, because this makes a nice natural hedge that you do not want to walk through. So if you have an area that you're concerned with people accessing or cutting through or something, this is a great plant to put in that place, because you're not messing with these spines. These thorns. I call them the wrong thing. They're thorns. So the thorns may be branched, and they might even have leaves coming from them. So here you can see the thorn, and then here is a leaf emerging, because this is a growing point. This is a node. So that's how you know a thorn when you see them. Honey locust, if you're familiar with honey locust trees, that's another one that gets thorns. So thorns are modified shoots. And then we have prickles. Prickles are what we usually call thorns. They're the sharp things on roses. So roses, every rose does not have a thorn. Every rose has a prickle. That's a lot harder to rhyme in songs. So they say every rose has its thorn, but every rose has its prickle. They're modified skin of the plant. So the epidermis, these are actually formed from the skin of the plant. So spines are modified leaves, thorns are modified branches, and prickles are modified epidermis, or skin of the plant that has formed spikes. They arise from anywhere in the plant. So it doesn't have to be from the growing node. It doesn't have to be from where a leaf would be. It can be anywhere. They can find prickles anywhere. And they come off the plant easily. I don't know if any of you have ever gotten roses and you can just sort of peel those thorns off. If the florist hasn't done it for you already, or if you're cutting them at home, you can just sort of snap those off. And they come off easily because they're not attached to the vascular system of the plant like spines and thorns. Spines and thorns are both attached to the vascular system. And yeah, that's why the thorns come off so easily if you're pulling pulling them out of the ground, or, you know, or if you're weeding, that's why they end up in your gloves, because they're just not attached to the vascular system. They're just kind of superficially there. So you might notice that on many plants, the parts that support the fruit so are the parts that have that prickle, that thorn, or the spine, or they don't actually, I'm sorry. So when you're looking at a plant, a lot of times the portion of the plant that's holding the fruit does not have that armor. And that's because the plant wants its fruit to be disseminated, right? It wants something to come around, eat the fruit, and distribute it so this plant can reproduce. So it's not going to be armored where the flowers and the fruits are. So think of rose hips, the fruits that come from roses. They're up at the top of the plant, and all the prickles are down below. And that's so something can come by and eat that. And it's in this nice fleshy fruit that's delicious, which is another adaptation. So something eats it and then disseminates it. So it's very strategic the way these plants have adapted. So fruits surrounded by thorns, of course, are not moved around easily. So they're going to not be as thorny usually where the fruits are, right? So thorns, spines, and prickles are another adaptation. Some plants feature one or more of these sharp and pointy protections. This you might be familiar with. This is wineberry. This is an invasive plant. But these are prickles along here, and then these are actually glandular hairs, but these are all forming from the epidermis of the plant and not from the vascular. So there's no thorns or spines here, just prickles and glandular hairs here. Some plants choose to poison their attackers and use toxins to protect themselves. So certain plants let you know they're dangerous and to approach at your own risk, while others keep their secrets to themselves until it's too late to turn back, that you've already been attacked. And just assume that you have learned that lesson and you'll never do that again. So this is maybe a plant that you're familiar with. So this is stinging nettle. It's one of those plants that announces its discomfort you may feel while engaging this plant. So if you take a look here on the stems of stinging nettle, these are called trichomes, which are basically miniature hypodermic needles, and they cover the leaves and the stems of this plant. And really that is for protection from herbivory, right? From something eating it. Although humans boil it and eat this, and it's very nutritious, animals can't do that. And so this keeps them from eating it. Eating the plant. When you brush against this plant, they inject chemicals into the attacker, resulting in the pain of a million bee stings or something like that. At least that's what it felt to me the first time I encountered this, and I had no idea what it was. My first encounter with this was I went off trail, which, you know, lesson learned, shouldn't have been off trail in the first place, I know, through a meadow, and I was in sandals. And I ran into this plant, and all of a sudden my feet were on fire. It was horrible. I had no idea what this plant was. And then I learned it, and I will never forget it. I learned it really quickly. Stinging nettle between the toes is nothing that's really exciting or anything I want to repeat again. Some people call it 7-minute itch because it kind of stings for that long and then slowly subsides. So this plant is known for its medicinal properties. It's juiced, eaten by a lot of people, has even been used for arthritis treatment by encouraging the stinging of the plant. So intentionally applying this plant to cause the stinging as an arthritis treatment. I have zero interest in eating this plant or using it for arthritis treatment at this point in my life. Who knows, things might change. But it is an important larval food source for a variety of butterflies, and certain butterflies need it exclusively. So even though it's something that we don't like, or we might not like because it causes us pain, it's important to remember that these adaptations and these plants serve a function in our environment. So we have to remember that balance there. So we have that toxic adaptation, and then we have this toxic adaptation, right? So other plants choose to keep their toxic protections hidden. And so you might not look at this plant and think, oh, you're poisonous. But this, of course, is poison ivy. And so Toxicodendron radicans which not to be confused with sumacs or anything like that. This has a compound called I have trouble saying it, urushiol, which causes a reaction in many of us. Now, for me personally, I didn't get poison ivy until I was in my mid-20s and volunteered to pull poison ivy off of a bank along a road at a park system I worked for because I didn't get poison ivy and everybody else did. I said, oh, I don't get it. I'll go pull it out. No problem. And then was covered with poison ivy. And now I get poison ivy. But not everybody reacts to it. And there's different levels of reaction to it. For some people, it puts them in the hospital, and for others, it's mild. But this toxin that's in here is, it helps prevent herbivory, but it's only humans and I think guinea pigs or hamsters, something like that get the rash from poison ivy. So this oil that's in there that causes a rash isn't the way that it causes problems or protects itself from other animals eating it. And you will see insect damage on here. But it is those oils that are in there that protect the plant. So sometimes the way the plant has adapted affects us in a way that maybe is sort of unintentional or not the primary way of defense of a plant. But it's also important to remember that though this plant does cause us rashes and annoys us, it is a really important bird food source for migrating and overwintering birds. The leaves are eaten by many mammals, and then many other mammals, birds, and amphibians even find shelter among the leaves and the stems, which we couldn't imagine because every part is toxic to most of us. But for these animals, it's really important part of our ecosystem. But that is an adaptation, right, to protect itself. And then I wonder if you have thought of the colors of berries or the fall colors of leaves as plant adaptations. So when you think of fall color, it happens when the fruits are getting ripe, right? And little fruits are really hard to see if you're a bird flying over, if you're migrating, you might not be able to see these fruits on these plants. But if a whole tree turns red or maroon or yellow, that is an indication from high up above that there's some fruit ripening going on down here and there may be food to eat. And so you can think of fall color as announcing to the animal world that food is ready here, and that food can sustain migrating animals, and then also our resident animals that have to live through our winters, right? So it would be energy intensive for these animals to keep checking back to see if these fruits are ripe. So the plants develop a way to say, hey, everything's okay to eat over here now. And the change in color and the fall color is a way that can happen. Those plant cues help those animals out. And so here, a winter berry, holly, loses its yellow fall leaves. So the leaves turn a yellow fall color, and then it loses them. And then these berries are revealed, and they're easy to see and ready to eat, right? And they'll last through the winter, especially if they're against the siding of a red barn where the birds don't see them, they become invisible. So these are some of the last ones that get eaten in our gardens because they're hidden against the red barn. So this adaptation to be bright so that animals can see it and find it and eat it is lost here when you plant them against the red barn, which is interesting, I think, too. It's fascinating to watch. So we have those cues that can help those plant adaptations. But it's not only the color of the leaves, but the texture of the leaves that can be an adaptation and a defense. So here you see the spiny margins of the leaf. So remember, these are from the epidermis. So these could be prickles. We call it a spiny leaf margin, generally in what I teach woody plant identification here for the horticulture program. And we call these spiny leaf margins. And so it's just a modified leaf, right? So this is a protection, of course, like hollies and everything else. This is not a holly, this is Mahonia, but the leaves look like holly. And these spines stop animals from crunching down and chewing the leaves. So that's one adaptation that we have here. And if we were doing this in person, I would be handing you this and trying to get you to guess what the other adaptations are on here, or if we could chat. But, well, let's see, let's try the chat. What other adaptations do you think are going on this leaf? You can put it in the chat. If you have any guesses. The color, the leather look. Yeah. Yeah, both of those are adaptations, because in addition to fall color, sort of notifying animals passing by that there might be ripe fruit here, the color also changes the palatability of the plant. So that change in fall color is a chemical change. And so like when we think of our fall color that our trees do, like our maples, that green is chlorophyll, and that's very delicious to a lot of animals. But as soon as they start turning red or orange, there are less nutrients in there for the animals, and oftentimes they're more bitter. Anthocyanins and carotenoids that make the oranges and yellows, they are bitter and not as palatable, and it protects the plant. So this change, a lot of our evergreens change to this purple color, this bronzing, and that could be a chemical reaction that discourages herbivory at that time, right? So also the waxy texture here, the reflection, oh, that's a good call too. So the waxy texture here, the epidermis, the skin of the leaf is very glossy, and that is a protection also. So that helps with the stomates. So this is what we call a broadleafed evergreen. So this holds on to its leaves all winter, but it has these wide leaves, which means there's a lot of potential for losing water through those, because there's stomates on the undersides of these leaves. And so this plant wants to protect its water, especially in the winter when water is scarce and drying winds come through and can be really problematic for plants. They have developed this waxy coating, and that waxy coating keeps the stomates from losing as much water. It protects these. So a lot of our broadleafed evergreen plants have this waxy protective coating so that they make it through the winter. Now, other plants, think of our pines, spruces, firs, they have adapted in a different way to hang on to their leaves and not lose all their moisture, right? They have adapted to have these reduced surface area. So all the leaves are just these tiny little needles where the stomates, there's hardly any stomates there at all. And so they're not going to lose moisture because they've reduced the surface area. So they don't need that waxy coating as much as these guys do to keep the water from going out. Also, the needles tend to be flexible so they can shed snow. So just another adaptation here. And then we have essential oils, right? And so essential oils are, or the aromatic compounds in a plant, let's say that. So here we have, this is spice bush, Lundarobenzoin. So yellow flowers in the early spring, they're getting ready to bloom soon. And if it's a female plant, because this has male and female plants, it's dioecious, it'll have red fruits that we can eat and that wildlife like to eat. But if you scratch any part of the twigs or branches of this plant or crush the leaves, it's very aromatic. Sassafras is the same way. And aromatic doesn't have to smell good. It could be an awful smell also, but it's serving the same purpose. And this is one of the most fascinating things to me as far as plant adaptations go. We think it smells good and we can create tea out of it and that kind of thing. But it's often the aromatic compounds in plants that give the color and scent to the reproductive structures of the plant. So when we say a flower smells good, often it's chemicals in the plant, you know, that's going up to the flower that causes that fragrance. And it is that fragrance that attracts pollinators, and and also attracts things to come by and eat the fruits and help with seed dispersal by the animals. Additionally, some compounds can repel herbivores. So when I teach programs on gardening with deer, I recommend, when you're trying to figure out what plants you want to plant in your landscape, if you have a problematic or if you have a deer issue in your landscape, which we do here. If you want to know what deer eat and don't eat, come here and check it out, because we have a significant deer population here. But I often recommend that you buy plants that have fragrant twigs and fragrant leaves when you crush them, because oftentimes those oils that are in those plants are not palatable to deer. That's one of the purposes of having those compounds in the plant, is to prevent herbivory. You can see here that insects do eat these. So there are insects that don't mind the chemical compounds in here that create those fragrances, but the deer don't tend to eat these. And so that's important to know too, is that these defenses, these adaptations can vary in who they're useful against or who they support. So some compounds can repel herbivores, some can attract herbivores, and some of these oils even act as antimicrobials. So they just keep diseases at bay, right? Volatile compounds are also what causes allelopathy. Allelopathy is the ability of a plant to inhibit the growth of other plants around it. So black walnut is one of the most famous ones for this, where people say, oh, I can't grow anything under a black walnut. And that's because a black walnut is allelopathic, which means that it exudes compounds that are growth regulators and stops plants from growing underneath it. Now, there are plants that grow just fine under black walnuts, and not everything is susceptible to its compounds, but there's a lot of popular plants that are not compatible with the chemicals that black walnuts give off. And so, it varies. There's an invasive plant, garlic mustard. You might be familiar with that. It's also allelopathic. And if you crush that, it smells kind of like garlic, which is why it has its name. And that also, if you leave the leaves there and let it decompose there, that causes allelopathy and will actually stop other plants from growing around it, which is one of its strategies and how it's become so successful. The fragrances and the oils and the compounds have also been found to be triggered when a plant is damaged. So these various chemical compounds and fragrances and odors, as we take them in, can actually be a means of communication inside the plant. So when a leaf is damaged, the plant triggers these compounds, and then that triggers a defense mechanism that changes the chemistry in the plant to make it less palatable to whatever might be infesting it or attacking it. Or it can do the same thing within a plant community. So one plant says, hey, I'm being attacked, and these volatile compounds are released, these fragrances, these oils are released, and the rest of the plants start to change their chemistry to become less palatable. So, so these can talk to each other and communicate through these compounds, which is an amazing adaptation that I think a lot of people don't realize that plants can do. You might be giving me, with me, when I think that I'm suspect of something that somebody's saying to me, my eyebrow goes up. The mask, having to wear a mask hasn't helped cover that up at all. And so, so you might be raising your eyebrow right now about this, but there's scientific evidence and peer-reviewed journal articles that prove that this is the case, and this is part of the adaptations that are going on here. So isn't that fascinating? And I started this talk with a picture of the native Greenbrier. So this is Greenbrier here. I grew up with this plant tugging at my pant legs and arm sleeves. And as I explored the woods in the Pine Barrens where I grew up, it was just everywhere. And when I see this plant, I always think of home and being out in the woods with my sister and exploring and all kinds of good stuff. So to me, the constant bright green of the stems and the leaves and were always intriguing. So I would just disconnect myself whenever I got caught up into it, and would carry on with my explorations, not mad at the plants at all. But you can see, you just don't know. I didn't think about what the purpose of those thorns was. It wasn't to capture me, right? It was to stop it from being eaten by something else. So what many people consider a weed or a problem, this uses its green prickles to protect its food, to protect its fruit, to feed lots of different birds, in the woods. So it is a very important, again, wildlife food source, and an important part of our ecosystem, even though we don't like it. I think one of the reasons why I wanted to do this talk is because there's so many plant adaptations that we find annoying or problematic, or we try to hybridize out, like thornless raspberries and that kind of thing. And really they're there because they serve a purpose. They've evolved over time in our ecosystem, and they serve a purpose. And it's to protect fruit so that it can, or protect itself so it can carry on, you know, to support the birds that eat the fruits and that kind of thing. So it's not entirely covered in sharp appendages. The young shoots of this are prickle free, which allows numerous mammals to eat the green foliage when not much is left in the winter months, right? So the newer growth, it says, okay, I will share this with you, but my older growth, the more established growth, I'm going to hang on to so that I can grow again in a future year. So these adaptations are intentional and have happened in conjunction with the animals and insects and fungus and everything else around. So, and then the stems and the leaves, because this is evergreen, create fortified shelters for small mammals and many birds. So while we might think, oh gosh, look at this mess, it's just covered and filled with thorns and I hate it, and I just wish we could just pull it all out and get rid of it, it is serving a purpose and it's supporting the ecosystem. So hopefully this has given you an idea of the variation in plant defenses and plant adaptations. Often they're there to protect themselves while also protecting the birds, insects, amphibians, mammals that aid them in the spread of their seeds and the continuation of the species. And of course, some tell you right away to leave me alone, while then others let you get close and then fight back. And some exhibit softer and more gentle ways of protecting themselves without causing harm to others, while others are sharp and pointy and, you know, might give you a little pain. So perhaps we can learn a lot from the defense mechanisms of plants and relate that to the defense mechanisms of people, and that there's different ways to interact and different reasons why people and plants have their varied defenses. We never know what the plant might be protecting besides its own life, and we cannot always predict what will happen by looking at the exterior. And that is true for people also, right? So with that, kind of quick talk about plant adaptations, I'm happy to take any questions you might have about the Arboretum, about the about plant adaptations, or anything like that. And you can just put them in the chat if you want. Find the chat. And if you have no questions, I encourage you to get out into this beautiful day and go look at some plant adaptations in your own backyard. Are all the plants that I mentioned native to Pennsylvania? No. No, many of them are not. But you could probably find all of those adaptations in some native plant to Pennsylvania, without a doubt. The mullen's not native, Mahonia is not native, cactus aren't native. Thank you for attending. Okay, is there a person there who can advise on insects on indoor plants? If you are looking for help on your indoor plants, what I recommend is there's Penn State Extension in every county, and they have helplines, and they have people you can send a picture to, and they can help you identify and make recommendations for the plant problem. They are a free resource. They're in every county, and I highly recommend them to help out with any problems you might have on your houseplants, or even as you're gardening through the season. Any other questions? All right, everybody. Well, thank you for joining. And have a great day. Thanks, Linda and Tammy.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy. Have a great day. Enjoy this beautiful weather.
Yes, you too. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.